I've analyzed 754 Settlers of Catan games to see what placements lead to the most wins. More specifically, I've looked at what type of strategies work best on what boards. The data includes, for example, number diversity, the scarcity of resources, the value of ore, and placement order. I'm Treeckosaurus, and in this video I will share with you what I've discovered, so stay tuned. And without further ado, let's get started with result number 1, largest army versus longest road. My expectations going in were that players who pursue the largest army have a better chance of winning the game than players who pursue the longest road. But I was wrong. In fact, 5 more players won with the longest road than with the largest army. The option to win without army and road has a 14% win rate, just like pursuing both. I take from this that it is best to pursue either road or army based on the state of the board and its potential, but that it's also possible to win if the plan doesn't go through. Let's move on to result number 2, what is the best position to place from. My personal preference before this research were first, second and third position, and as you can see from the results, my preference had some truth to it. Second position performs the best, closely followed by first and third position, while fourth position is the worst to start from. My theory for this, the stronger the players are, the more likely it is they take the strongest spots away with their first picks. In my opinion, the King of Catan players are way stronger than the average Settlers of Catan player, so this stat changes with the level of players, because weaker players are gonna make more placement mistakes. Before we look at the third result, I have to make a disclaimer. This research only tracks results from the winner, so we can't know for certain how often a specific strategy was actually used. With that being said, let's take a look at the winning strategy, shall we? Based on this data, hybrid or cheap takes the most wins. The difference between hybrid or cheap and full or cheap is the wood and/or brick gain the hybrid or cheap strategy has. The 5 resource strategy also wins quite a few games. This data doesn't give much insight in what the actual win rates per strategy are, but it does give a lot of insight in what strategies are picked the most. And if we take a look at how these strategies perform on different boards, we're looking into result number 4. My expectations going in were that board strategies perform a lot better on low ore boards. So these statistics surprised me quite a bit. Board strategies are strategies that focus on a certain 2-for-1 board. Because they have a reliable ore gain, I expect that it would lead to better results. It turns out all strategies perform the same to a certain extent, so let's have a look at boards with more ore. Result number 5 is based on medium and high ore boards. On medium level ore boards, which I see as between the 7 and 11 points of production for ore, you don't see many changes compared to the full results. But if we take a look at high ore boards, with more than 11 points of ore production, we see the following. Full or cheap has a similar win rate, but hybrid or cheap gains win rate up to 13%. Of course, this also has to do with more players being able to pick an or cheap strategy on a high ore board. But I think such a big margin of improvement also comes from better performance. Next, we take a look at number diversity. And I define number diversity as the amount of different numbers you placed on with your first 2 settlements. My hypothesis going into this study was that having 6 different numbers is most likely to succeed. However, this does not turn out to be the case. There were 281 wins from players who started on 5 different numbers, and 261 wins for players who started on 6 different numbers. If we look at setups with 4 and 3 different numbers, we see 81 and 21 wins respectively. Okay, so what does it mean? My interpretation is that having either 5 or 6 resources doesn't matter as much in the long run. For a standalone game you could double up on a 9 and it could barely roll, so then it matters a lot. But the data shows that it's not a mistake from a technical point of view. Lately I've been paying more attention to the location of the Desert Hex, and in result number 7 I'm going to show you why. You see, the position of the Desert Hex influences how many spots on the board have resource production from 3 different hexes. And that's not all. As it turns out, it also has a big influence on the win rates in the different positions. As you can see in the graph, first position has an average win rate of 28% on boards where the Desert Hex is placed in the outer ring. But its win rate drops with 6% if the Desert Hex moves to the second ring. That's massive. I think the main reason for this drop is the fact that the desert location change removes some Treeckosaurus hex spots off the board, making it more likely first position is locked out of a Treeckosaurus hex spot with its second settlement. For the 8th result, we look at the rarest resources and their impact on what strategies win the most. As you can see in the graph, we have the overall win rates for the most popular strategies in the second column. We already knew the hybrid or with cheap and the 5 resource strategy are the most popular strategies that often win. But it's interesting to see how win rates change on different boards. For example, on boards with ore as the rarest resource, we see that hybrid or with cheap performs a little worse than the 5 resource setup. But on boards with brick as the rarest resource, hybrid or with cheap is far stronger. What is important to add here is the fact that there are many more boards with either ore or brick as the rarest resource than it's the case with wood, wheat and sheep, which makes the data for wood, wheat and sheep a little less reliable. But tendencies like road builder strategies performing well on boards with rare wheat or ore is most likely accurate, just like hybrid or with sheep performing better on boards with rare sheep, wood or brick. With that being said, let's move on to the next result. With this result, we won't look as much at percentages as with the previous result. This time we look at the total amount of wins. On screen you see the statistics for the amount of wins with 0 victory point draws. Please notice how full or with sheep has 20 wins with 0 victory point draws in 305 games. Now we see the same statistic for strategies with 2 victory point draws. If we look at full or with cheap again, we see 33 wins in only 142 games. To find out if its win rate improves with drawing victory points, we also have to take a look at win rates with 1 victory point drawn. And as you can see, it's way closer to the win percentage with 0 victory points than the win percentage with 2 victory points. Now why is this the case? I believe the biggest reason for this win percentage difference is the advantage of not having to place a 4th settlement down. It's usually pretty expensive for an or with cheap player to get wood and brick, and this way they can spend their resources more efficiently. In the survey I've asked players to tell me how they think they won the game. This question was filled out over 600 times and I did my best to quantify the results by searching for what words come up the most. It's more of a fun result than completely serious, but let's see what comes up. 112 players mentioned the Monopoly card had something to do with their win. 200 players mentioned the worth of their board. 118 players mentioned their trades and 66 times the terms blocked and or blocks were mentioned. 6 times someone considered him or herself unblockable. The term dice was mentioned only 33 times, while 208 players believe their production was a key aspect of their win. Diversity was mentioned 9 times and being able to stay under the radar was mentioned 13 times. Getting rare resources was mentioned 24 times, while placements were mentioned 52 times. 3 players believe they won because of their skills, while 158 players believe they had luck or were lucky. Let's move on to the 11th result from the data research. And in this result is all about the question, who's in the lead? Or more specifically, how often does the player with the best placements win? I've asked the submitting players to describe their position in game after the settlement placements, and here are the results. 175 players believed they were in the lead after the initial placements phase. 161 players believed they had the second place. 114 players believed they were in third place, while only 42 players believed they had the worst setup after doing the initial settlement placements. As you can see in the statistics, the players who considered themselves as the leading player often had an or with cheap strategy or a 5 resource strategy. If we look at players who considered themselves as the third place, we see some different results. Board strategies, road builder and production strategies are selected more often. And this trend continues if we take a look at the last place after the placements. If people place out a board strategy, they often consider themselves in a tough position. My take from this is that if you play a longest road or a board strategy in King of Catan, you're less likely to get blocked and robbed. But I also think that these 2 strategies can be piloted to a great win rate just like or with sheep. It's about the perceived strongest strategy. If some players will start doing really well with board strategies, maybe the metagame changes and people start focusing less on or with sheep, which could give it the freedom to boost its win rate. These were 11 results from the data research, but before I wrap up this video I have a special bonus result for you all. And this bonus result is about the placements in cities and knights. 42 Cities and Knights players also filled out the questions, and what stood out was the following result. Half of the games were won by second position. And this was a huge surprise for me, as I believed that fourth position was the strongest in Cities and Knights. These were the most interesting and surprising results I found. Which one of these results was the most interesting or surprising to you? Let me know in the comments. I reply to every single comment, so come at me. Also make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future videos. Thank you for watching.